Welcome to Whiskey Gaming, and this is my late review of Split Fiction. I play it on the PS5. It's also available on the Xbox Series X, Series S, and PC. So we'll start a little differently and let you know that this is a 100% co-op game, and that comes into the story because you can play as either Zoe or Mio, and whoever you play with, in my case, my friend, they can play as the other. I played as Zoe, she played as Mio. And how the story kicks off is they are both writers who are trying to get published, and well, they haven't been successful. So they sign up with this huge corporation called Raider. And the idea is they're going to be plugged into this crazy cool VR situation, which is going to help basically pull the ideas out of their mind and help to fully realize them and get them to fully visualize what they're trying to write so that they can write down the stories, and then they will be in a state where they can be published, which is kind of the goal of them as writers. Unfortunately, when they're about to be plugged into the machines, Mio starts to get this really bad feeling about the whole situation, and she freaks out and winds up stuffed into the same little VR orb as Zoe. And now you begin to explore basically both of their stories, Mio being a sci-fi writer and Zoe being a fantasy writer. They're kind of different ideas. And of course it goes well beyond that because you get to learn more about the characters, get to understand just everything going on. There's some twists and turns and mysteries along the way, and I loved the story. Plain and simple, I thought it was an excellent story. I loved the writing. I loved everything they were doing. It was also really fun because they made a bunch of references, not just visual references, but some of the lines, you're just sitting there going, oh man, that's great. There was a Sonic one, gotta go fast, things like that. I just loved. But even beyond that, I think the character development, the story development, the character growth, just everything about the story really pulled me in. I don't know what else I could say about the story apart from just praising it even more and repeating myself. Now let's get into the audio, and the voiceover work is like 99% amazing. Every now and then there were a couple of lines where I was like, it could have been delivered just a little bit better, but never to the point where you're like, oh, that's crap. It was all really well done, and the actresses did a phenomenal job with the main characters. I think everyone really just did a great job and helped bring it to life. But then you've got the sci-fi and the fantasy, so you've got music for both, and they both work. I don't know if I need to own the soundtrack, but I will say it was a great soundtrack and it worked very well in all situations. And that goes along with the sound effects because you've got the sci-fi sound effects and you got the fantasy sound effects and everything in between sound effects, and I think they did a great job with all of those. Now let's get into the gameplay mechanics and whatnot, and this is a split-screen action-adventure puzzle-solving 100% co-op, very narrative-driven game. And I hit that narrative-driven part because it really kind of plays into the gameplay because there's no chat function built into the game. Yes, of course, you could do a party so that you and your friend or whoever you're playing with could talk and discuss the puzzles and figure them out way more easily. But at the same time, because the story is so good and the story is so engaging and your characters are talking a lot, and you find out things about them in some of these conversations, never necessarily the biggest things, but things that help build their character. So having somebody else yammer on in your ear when you might want to be engaged in the story kind of takes you out of it. So it does impact the gameplay to an extent in that sense. But most of it is running, platforming, puzzle solving. There is some combat. And the combat varies from sci-fi to fantasy. Even the boss fights, though, they're more like puzzle-solving things and trying not to die things than they are traditional, like, I'm gonna whack you until your health bar is depleted kind of boss fights. But then as the game goes on, they kind of marry the visuals and the gameplay because there are times where it matters, and I'm not going to go into too much detail, but I think it was really cool. They also did just absolutely crazy things with the cameras, which obviously change up the gameplay to an extent. Sometimes it's top down, sometimes it's side scrolling. Most of the time it's third person and you have full control over your camera, but they do mix it up on you and I love it. I will say the split screen thing, which is also a huge advantage in puzzles, is also a little bit distracting at times. Because sometimes you'll be looking at your partner's screen or they'll be looking at your screen and, you know, it can get a little mixed up there. But at the same time, when you're doing puzzles, you might see something on your partner's screen and be able to be like, oh, you need to do this and like kind of guide them to that or vice versa. I loved the variety in the puzzles. I loved the variety in the levels. Oh man, the level design is great and how it adds to the gameplay and the like parkour elements and the swinging and the zipping around and all the different abilities you get depending on the story you're in. Like there's a story where you're running around with dual pistols that are just fire like crazy, but what you do with them is 99% puzzle solving. And then there's ones where you have like spirit animals that do different things. One summoned like tentacles out of a portal. And all of it is used to solve really cool and interesting puzzles. And I'm gonna say this because it was just kind of stupid. My friend and I got so into the more complicated puzzles that whenever they slapped us with a simple one, we got stuck on them. It was kind of dumb, but it was kind of funny too. But I think they really did nail the gameplay, and they used their different ideas, the sci-fi, the fantasy, just everything they were doing to the fullest effect. Now let's get into the controls, and the controls are good. They're not flawless. There were a few times where I definitely felt like I had pushed in the right direction when jumping and the game kind of went fuck you no. But the respawns are so easy in this game that you don't really lose much, so it's not that big of a deal. But overall, the controls work more than well enough. There were just a few times where I kind of felt like they failed me. And then we have the graphics and visuals, and this is not the like graphical powerhouse, but I'm sure in some ways that it takes a lot of processing power to do what they're doing. But really at its core, it's the visual style of this game. While all the characters look great, all the worlds look great from a graphical standpoint, I think what they did visually was really cool because you jump into multiple sci-fi stories, you jump into multiple fantasy stories, and each has their own unique flair. Your characters have their own unique costumes for everyone, their own abilities, their own whatever, and it's all different and it's all so well brought together. And then as the story goes on, as I mentioned, like the visuals start to become very different and they start to mix and match things and it just looks really cool. And having all of that going on at once can be chaotic, but it's also just amazing and it fits so very well within the story. But then other times they just do some of the wildest shit. Like there's one where the story is being written based on your actions essentially. And it starts out side-scrolling and hand-drawn, and then it turns into like hand-drawn, but third person. And they just do some really cool things. Not just that one, but like all the different stories are very well done, have these really cool effects. I just can't praise what they did visually enough. It's one of those things where I can try and talk about it, but it really does have to be seen. And then you can really appreciate what they're doing with all the little different things. It's not just building a different world. Well, I mean, it really is building a different world. It's not building one giant cohesive world where everything flows, which generally makes sense. You're going into all these smaller worlds, and each of them have their own, as I've stated, unique flair and visual design. And at the end of the day, the art style is just fantastic and works so very well with everything they're doing. And then they added some great just visual nods, as I mentioned. Like they have some audio nods, but they have some great visual nods, like the Dark Souls campfire. Just plain and simple, visually this game does stand out very well, not like as a graphical powerhouse, but as a design powerhouse and a directing powerhouse with the camera angles, as I mentioned in gameplay, and just everything they did from a visual standpoint. I can't think of any real glitches we had. My partner did kind of sink through the floor at one point, but they popped right back up and it didn't cause us any problems. Okay, so let's get into the wrap up. One cool feature that I kind of forgot to mention is the friend pass, which is what we used. I bought the game and my friend was able to download the friend pass version of the game, which allows them to play without buying the game. So that's an awesome feature. You can play with friends or randos. I obviously, in a game like this, chose to play with a friend. To put it simply in the wrap up, I think this is a phenomenal game. This is absolutely awesome, from the storytelling to the visuals to just the everything. I really enjoyed the experience, and my friend, who doesn't game nearly as much as me, was just absolutely in love with it as well. So you've kind of got two recommendations out of this video. If this game looked at all interesting to you, if I have said anything that makes it sound interesting to you, if I haven't said anything that makes it sound interesting to you, you should still pick it up and you should absolutely play it. This game was awesome. Okay, in the comments down below, as you can tell, I'm really hyped on this game, and it's not the first game in a long time that I've been this hyped on, but I want to know, what's the last game you've been like crazy hyped on after you beat it? You were just like, oh my god, wow, this was just the most absolutely amazing thing. And as always, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please hit that like button, and if you like what I'm doing in general, share and subscribe. Have a good one. The actresses did and the actresses both the visuals and the gameplay. Why would you text me now?